The application we're going to deploy is very simple. It consists of a single index.html file. Now, to serve this up, our instances need a web server installed and running, and in this case, we're going to use the Apache web server. Let's open up the file named appspec.yml. We'll scroll down so we can get a good look at it. There we go. Now, Apache serves up web pages from the folder /var/www/html. So we need to make sure CodeDeploy puts the index.html file in that location. Now, this file that we're looking at now is, again, the application specification file. This is a YAML formatted file that tells CodeDeploy how to deploy the application, particularly which files to copy to the instances, where to copy them, what file permissions to set, if any, and what scripts to run. Now, before I walk you through this file, let me warn you that some of this may seem confusing at first, but once we do our first deployment, it will all make a lot more sense, I promise. So just stick with me. Now, starting at the top, the version is always going to be 0.0, so we can just ignore that. The operating system, or OS, is Linux because our instances are running Amazon Linux. The Files section specifies the source file we want to copy, in this case index.html, and the ultimate destination for the file is /var/www/html. Under the Hooks section, we've got three subsections: before install, after install, and application stop. These refer to different lifecycle events that occur during deployment. Now, I'm going to explain what the lifecycle events are in a moment. Let's start with the before install event. This references a script named install_dependencies.sh stored under the scripts folder. Let's take a look at this real quick. Go ahead and click on sample app. Open up the scripts folder right here. And then open up the install dependencies.sh file. All right, now, as you might have guessed, this script installs the one dependency our application has, the Apache web server. This is a simple bash script that just executes a yum install -y httpd to install the Apache web server. Pretty simple. All right, let's jump back over to the app spec file. We'll click on sample app again, and then browse right back into it. Scroll down a bit. Now, directing your attention back to the before install event, take a look at the timeout. Now, this limits how many seconds this script can run before CodeDeploy stops the deployment and considers it to have failed. After that, the run as directive simply tells CodeDeploy to run this script as the root user. Next in line, we have the after install lifecycle event. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, if we have a before install event and an after install event, what about the install event? Well, the install lifecycle event consists of CodeDeploy simply copying the files to the destination. So to put this in order, the before install event runs the install_dependency script, installs the Apache web server, and then next, the install lifecycle event copies the index.html file to the /var/www/html directory on the instance. And then after that, the after install lifecycle event occurs, during which time CodeDeploy will execute two scripts, change_index.sh and start_server.sh. Now, the change_index script modifies the index.html file to include a unique deployment ID, and we're going to see what that looks like after we deploy the app. For now, let's take a look at the start_server script. Let's jump back out to the sample app directory, click on the scripts directory, and then click on start_server.sh. Now, were you expecting more? All this does is it starts the Apache web server. So we've got one script to install Apache, another script to start Apache. Now, this is all really straightforward. In fact, this might be one of the simplest application deploys ever. Let's go ahead and jump back to the app spec file again. Next, take a look at the lifecycle event named application stop. Now, as you probably guessed, the stop_server script actually stops the web server. But when does this event occur? Well, out of the lifecycle events listed here, the application stop event actually occurs First, you see the order that the lifecycle events are listed in the app spec file does not control the order in which the events occur. To better understand this, please open up a new tab in your web browser, and I want you to browse to a URL with me. Now the URL is BenPiper.com /AWS CD LEH, and this is going to bounce you over to the official AWS documentation for the app spec file structure. Now, normally I would not show you documentation in a demo, but I make an exception here because we will be switching back and forth between the documentation and our app spec file. Now, listed here are all 13 of the lifecycle events that may occur during a deployment. Yes, there are 13, barely fits on the screen. Now, keep in mind that not all of these lifecycle events occur during every deployment. The events that occur depend on whether you're using a load balancer. Now, scroll down with me, please, to the section titled Run Order of Hooks in a Deployment. There we go. And then focus in, please, on the diagram on the right here. This shows the order of lifecycle events when you're using an elastic load balancer to perform what's called an in-place deployment. Now, we're going to get into deployment types a bit later, but for now, an in-place deployment is simply when you deploy an application to instances that already exist. Now, by the way, the diagram says with classic load balancer, but this actually does apply to application and network load balancers as well. Notice that the first lifecycle event is before block traffic, followed by the block traffic event. Now, suppose that you're deploying to instances behind an application load balancer. The block traffic event is when CodeDeploy deregisters those instances from the load balancer target group so that traffic does not get directed to them during the deployment. Now, let's say you want to run a script just before CodeDeploy blocks traffic to your instances. Well, to do that, you would add the name before block traffic to the hooks section of your app spec file and reference the script that you want to run. This is called hooking into a lifecycle event. Now, by the way, there are some events you cannot hook into. For instance, you cannot run a script during the block traffic lifecycle. Notice that the block traffic event block has a gray background. A gray background indicates that you cannot hook into that event, but you can hook into the before block traffic and after block traffic events and run scripts then. All right, moving along, the next event is application stop. Recall that in our app spec file, we're hooking into this event to stop the Apache web server. Right now, we don't have Apache even installed, so stopping the Apache service isn't going to have any effect. But for subsequent deployments to the same instances, Apache will be running, and so we do want to make sure it is stopped before we deploy any updates. Next, during the download bundle event, CodeDeploy copies your source application files to a temporary location on the instance. It does not copy the files to the final destination specified in the app spec file. It simply stages those files in a temporary directory on the instance. After that, we have the before install event, and you should recognize that because this is when we run that install_dependency script to install Apache. Next is the install stage. This is when CodeDeploy copies the files from the temporary staging directory to the final directory specified in the app spec file. Let's go ahead and jump back to that file. Now, the source file is index.html, and the destination is again /var/www/html. During the install stage, CodeDeploy copies that index.html file from the temporary staging folder into the destination folder. Now, especially if you come from the Windows world, copying files from one folder to another may not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of installing something, but that is exactly what it means here. After the install, we've got after install, which again executes two scripts, change_index and start_server. These scripts do execute in the order that they're listed here. All right, let's jump back over to the diagram. I've scrolled down just a bit so that we can see the rest of it. Now, after install, we've got application start. Wait a minute. Didn't we already start the application using the after install event? Well, yes, we did. You see, we don't have to hook into every one of these events. For example, we also don't hook into the validate service event or the before allow traffic or after allow traffic events. The specific events that you hook into is completely up to you. The important thing is that you make sure you're hooking them in the right order. I realize that is a lot to take in, so take a break if you want, get a drink, and then join me in the next clip when we'll tackle something easy, installing the CodeDeploy agent.